We've barely made a dent in 2024, and yet my greatest first world problem from 2023 remains. There are way too many fantastic indie games to play out there, to the point where playing them all would be virtually impossible. So, it's understandable that even the most adamant of indie game fans would miss some of the best, with time and or money being limited resources. But to the best of my ability, I'm here to point out my greatest indie loves that I believe were painfully overlooked and woefully underplayed. Before I do, we'd love if you'd be so kind as to check out our Patreon in the link below to help us in bringing a voice to the voiceless and gain some cool perks in the process, like free games depending on your membership tier and access to our phenomenally wholesome Discord community. Now, on to the games. Let's start with one of the most overlooked games from 2023, coming out to barely any fanfare despite mostly stellar reviews. I'm talking about This Bed We Made, a narrative-driven mystery game where you play as Sophie, a chambermaid at the Clarington Hotel in 1950s Montreal. The setting of This Bed We Made has plenty of character in and of itself. There's something undeniably quaint about watching the snow fall through the window as you make beds, tidy up the rooms of various guests, and perhaps take a quick peek at what books they're reading, what notes they've written, or what's in that mysterious briefcase. Yes, Sophie is more than a bit nosy, and the more you snoop, the more the game's surprisingly dark mystery begins coming to light. I can't say much more that you wouldn't be better off discovering for yourself, but let it be known that This Bed We Made is a narrative woven with enough twists, turns, and intriguing characters to hook you from beginning to end in its roughly 5 to 6 hour runtime. It helps that it has a great presentation too, depicting a lovingly designed Clarington hotel that feels authentic and lived in, while also delivering some stellar voice work, especially from the actress playing Sophie. Perhaps the premise of This Bed We Made was always going to relegate it to the role of a hidden gem, but I'd love for it to be hidden no longer. Next up, let's get really weird with Orbo's Odyssey, a short-form 3D platformer from the ever so appropriately named Fever Dream Softworks. This is a seriously fast-paced game that has you jumping, air drilling, and flying all over the place as you complete platforming challenges, pick up collectibles, and talk to its cast of weird, zany characters. Honestly, I kinda loved it. It's a game that was clearly designed to be pure fun with absolutely no filler, and the price and runtime at $6.99 for about an hour and a half of pure joy, in my opinion, reflect that. If you enjoy 3D platformers and are up for something that's frankly really goddamn weird, Orbo's Odyssey should be high up on your list. Let's stick with platforming for now, but drop one dimension back into 2D and talk about Splasher, the debut game from the brilliant folks at Splash Team who most recently released Tinykin, which is also excellent if you haven't checked that one out. Nobody really talks about Splasher though, and I'm not sure why. This is a precision platformer seemingly conceived by putting Super Meat Boy and the paint mechanics of Portal 2 in a cartoony blender and seeing what popped out. The result is a fast and incredibly satisfying game with brilliant level design that left me and my husband, who's not even a gamer by the way, shouting and jumping from our seats in anticipation as we barely made it to a checkpoint after a brutally demanding section. I wouldn't put Splasher in quite the same league of difficulty as Super Meat Boy because it's certainly hard but in no way sadistic. But the challenge here never feels unfair, controls never fail to be tight and responsive, and the music never failed to amp me up even as I fell into yet another vat of rising slime. Honestly, for the love of God, if platformers bring you any joy, it's really time to give Splasher a go. It deserves it, and so do you. Alright, fine, I'll move away from the platformers just for a little bit. My next pick is No Sun to Worship, a very under-the-radar little indie that I had the absolute pleasure of reviewing in 2023. Are there any fellow Splinter Cell fans out there? Any of you. First of all, we need to start a support group to talk about just how much Ubisoft has done us dirty for the past decade, and after that, you need to play the brief but oh so satisfying No Sun to Worship if you want just a tiny nostalgic bite of what feeling like Sam Fisher used to be like. While No Sun to Worship shies away from being too much of a Splinter Cell copycat, as if I would even mind, the gameplay hit just right for me. Each of the game's levels is a small open environment where you're tasked with skulking through the shadows and doling out bullet-shaped punishments to various prisoners around each location. It's never entirely clear why you're doing this, and the vague, pretentious story won't do much to enlighten you, but if you're itching for some slow-paced, strategic, and difficult stealth action gameplay, No Sun to Worship is a great choice. I really wish it had been longer than 3 hours because I can't mentally deal with the fact that this type of stealth game seemingly doesn't exist anymore, but I hope to see more games like it to fill that void in my heart. My next pick is seemingly the first in a genre whose name I made up, but I'd really like it to catch on. Stray Light is what I'd call a Souls-Light, a parry-heavy, combat-focused action-adventure that takes the typical workings of a Souls-like and makes them accessible? Fair? Respecting the player's time? Who's ever heard of such a thing? Okay, Souls-like bashing aside, I am really glad that Stray Lights exists. It feels like there's an entire subset of the gaming market made up of players like myself who love the combat, vibe, and intensity of Souls-likes, but hate the stingy checkpoints, obtuse mechanics, and deliberately cheap one-hit kills. And Stray Lights is kind enough to take all these points off the table. It's a Souls-light that demands significant dexterity from you, requiring you to switch your main character's color to match and correctly parry enemy attacks. But it also fully restores your health after each combat encounter, and has numerous checkpoints, making the difficulty feel much more palatable than your average entry in its genre. It certainly helps that it's stunningly gorgeous to look at too, especially with its colorful, bombastic boss fights. Seriously, the bosses in Stray Lights are incredibly cool, and you can tell they were created with a ton of care. Since its release, Stray Lights has also been updated with a couple new difficulty modes, including a story difficulty for those looking for an even gentler challenge, and a challenge mode for those looking for something just a tad closer to what Souls-likes traditionally offer. For my money, I would love to see more games that use accessibility to broaden the Souls-like genre's appeal, so I'm hoping this is just one of many to come. Alright, let's get back to the weird stuff because Orbo's Odyssey clearly didn't give us quite enough of that. My next pick is Roundabout, a totally normal game with a totally normal premise where you play as limo driver Giorgio Manos, whose limo is constantly inexplicably spinning in circles. And, well, you just kinda have to deal with it. Roundabout occupies a space somewhere between a platformer and Crazy Taxi, if I had to compare it to something, and the whole experience is about as zany as it gets, with plenty of absurd situations that are elevated by delightfully horrible FMV cutscenes that push terrible acting to its absolute limit. You'll laugh, you'll cringe, you'll maybe even fall in love. I mean, probably not, but who am I to hold you back? Next up is a visual novel from a developer who really is not known for their visual novels. Believe it or not, Eliza comes from Zachtronics. Yeah, that developer that put out those puzzle games that are trying to break your brain and make you feel like a total idiot, but in a good way, I guess. Eliza is something very different from their typical status quo, and with results like this, I frankly wish they had done more like it. You play as Evelyn, a woman with a mysterious past who begins working with the game's namesake, an AI counseling program called Eliza that does all of the therapist's work for them and requires nothing more of their human proxy than to read a real-time script that Eliza provides. But as you get to know the clients that Eliza aims to help, the game becomes a thought-provoking exercise around the role of technology in our society and at what point we've gone too far. Elevated by great artwork and excellent voice acting, Eliza is an unmissable, tightly paced visual novel that's far more than what it first meets the eye. Now for something totally different. Let's move on to Harmony's Odyssey, a colorful and relaxing puzzle game that asks you to assemble a large variety of 3D dioramas not unlike a living, breathing jigsaw puzzle. Now, any puzzle game fan looking for a serious challenge isn't going to find it here. This is a casual game through and through, and one I personally found to be a great way to wind down at the end of a stressful day. Each scene you assemble is lovingly crafted, and the visual cues you get from snapping its various pieces together feel tactile and satisfying. There are a ton of levels to get through here, with difficulty calibrated just right to require some thought without ever becoming frustratingly difficult, nor trivially easy. Anybody looking for a relaxing puzzle game to pick up and play should look no further. Okay, I said I was moving away from the platformers for a little bit, not for the entire rest of the video. I just had to squeeze one more into this list because Candleman really deserves it. This is a 3D platformer with a truly unique premise. You play as a candle whose wick can only burn for 10 seconds before being extinguished, and only by strategically burning that light when you need it will you make it through the game's dark, tricky corridors. Candleman has the flavor of a dark storybook fantasy and some really gorgeous art design to back that up. But the beauty here is far from just surface level, as it uses its limited time candle burning to great effect in its mechanics and level design. Every time I entered a new area, it felt like the game had new ideas to throw at me, and I can't recall a single moment that felt repetitive or disengaging. With under 1,000 reviews on Steam and over 6 years since its release, I can't help but feel that Candleman never quite found the audience it truly deserved. If you want something seriously out of left field, then perhaps I have saved the best for last. Get those headphones out because your eyes won't do you much good when playing Blind Drive, a dark comedy action game that's literally intended to be played with your eyes closed. This game is incredibly goofy and puts you in the shoes of Donnie, who somehow finds himself blindfolded and driving a car into oncoming traffic. Headphones are literally required here, as Blind Drive sound design is everything. You'll need to listen carefully for the sounds of approaching traffic and make sure you avoid any collisions. While you can and arguably should literally play Blind Drive with your eyes closed for maximum immersion, it does have at least some mild, minimalist visuals that accomplish what they set out to do. But there are few gaming experiences more unique and more overlooked than this one, as it has only about 250 reviews on Steam as the time of this video and yet an 87 on Metacritic. Hidden gems don't get much more hidden than this one, so I'd encourage you to give Blind Drive a look at its extremely reasonable $10 price point. And that's it for this video. I hope you found some new and interesting titles that you may have overlooked, and remember to like and subscribe and keep up to date with all our latest indie gaming content on I Dream of Indie Games.